My boss said I'd never be anything. Today he works for me. Bring coffee for Mr. Lucas, please." The receptionist's voice echoed through the silent hallway on the 35th floor. Edward looked up, disbelieving. The name sounded familiar, uncomfortable. But when the main office door opened and he saw who was inside, the ground seemed to disappear beneath his feet. It was him, Lucas Miller, the same young man who, years ago, he had fired with arrogance, saying he would never be anyone. Now Lucas was the new CEO of the company that had just been acquired, and Edward was just another manager waiting for instructions. Lucas stood up from the leather chair and walked slowly to the panoramic window, overlooking downtown Chicago. The tailored suit, the elegant watch, and the confident posture made it clear the boy from before had disappeared. The man before him was the result of years of silence, effort, and healed wounds. "It's been a while, Edward," Lucas said without turning around. "I didn't know it was you," the former boss replied, swallowing hard. Lucas smiled slightly. "I figured. A lot changes in 5 years." Silence filled the room, heavy, almost suffocating. Edward tried to hide his discomfort while looking around at the modern office, the company's new logo, everything reminding him that he was no longer in charge. But to understand how that moment happened, we need to go back a few years. Back then, Lucas was just a young, recently graduated analyst trying to survive in the corporate world. He worked at Collins & Partners, a financial consulting firm where Edward was director. Lucas was talented, dedicated, and dreamed of growing within the company. But Edward saw things differently. To him, Lucas was just another overly ambitious kid, someone who needed to be put in his place. And that's exactly what he did. One morning during a meeting, Lucas presented an innovative financial restructuring proposal that could save the company millions. The numbers were correct, the plan was solid, but Edward interrupted the presentation with disdain. "That's the kind of idea that seems good until someone with experience looks at it properly," he said, drawing forced laughs from the team. "Focus on the basics, Miller. You still have a lot to learn before trying to be the star." Lucas remained silent. He didn't react. But inside him, something began to change. That afternoon, while collecting his reports from the room, he heard the muffled laughter of 2 colleagues commenting that he had been put in his proper place. It was humiliating. Days later, Edward called him privately. He said the company was making cuts and that unfortunately his performance didn't justify keeping him. Lucas knew it was a lie. It was a dismissal disguised as a lesson. "A piece of advice," Edward said, shaking his hand for the last time. "The world doesn't need dreamers, it needs people who obey." That phrase burned like hot iron. On his way out, Lucas looked back and saw Edward's reflection in his glass office, laughing with other executives, as if nothing had happened. Right there, he promised himself that the nothing Edward saw in him would one day be impossible to ignore. The following weeks were tough. Lucas was unemployed, with mounting debts and pride too wounded to ask for help. But from the ashes, a decision was born. He would never again work for someone who made him feel small. He started studying at night, doing freelance work, and diving into everything he could learn about business and technology. He worked in coffee shops, libraries, and sometimes at dawn, in a small apartment he shared with another former colleague. Money was barely enough to eat, but the idea of giving up never crossed his mind. Meanwhile, Edward continued his comfortable life. He was respected, feared, and flattered in the corporate world, until, slowly, arrogance began to corrode everything he had built. Management mistakes, impulsive decisions, and the same contempt for those around him began to undermine his reputation. Years later, fate or time did what it always does. It leveled things out. Lucas, now a rising entrepreneur, began to stand out with his own business software company. His product simplified the management of small companies and soon caught the attention of investors. Meanwhile, Edward's company faced crises, debts, and loss of clients. It was then that, in a bold move, Lucas decided to invest heavily in buying precisely Collins & Partners, the company that once fired him. And when the contract was signed, he made sure not to fire Edward immediately. He wanted something bigger than revenge. He wanted understanding. He wanted to look the man who humiliated him in the eye and show what time had done. Back in the panoramic office, Edward was still trying to compose himself. Lucas watched the city and asked in a calm voice, "You know what's funny, Edward? You were right about one thing." "What?" asked the former boss hesitantly. "The world really doesn't need dreamers. It needs people who do." The phrase hung in the air like a silent punch. Lucas turned halfway, looked directly into the eyes of the man who had despised him, and completed, "And now, who works for whom?" Edward's gaze faltered, his voice failed, and he just looked away. That moment said everything that words no longer needed to say. But what Lucas still didn't know was that the real reckoning was just beginning. Chicago, 5 years earlier. The sound of the subway passing over the tracks mixed with the cold wind cutting through the downtown streets. It was the start of another day at Collins and Partners, and Lucas Miller hurried down the station stairs, holding coffee in one hand and his laptop in the other. He always arrived before schedule. He liked to start the day in silence, reviewing reports and preparing for meetings. But for most colleagues, this habit was just a reminder that he was different, too ambitious, too idealistic. The company occupied 3 floors of a modern building with glass walls and brushed metal desks. Behind that elegant appearance, there was a competitive, tense environment full of egos, and at the top of this chain was Edward Collins, the financial director and heir to the company's founder. Edward was a man of strong presence, firm voice, and a gaze that mixed confidence and contempt. Everything about him screamed power: the gold watch, the impeccable suit, the way he spoke to subordinates as if he were always testing everyone's loyalty. He believed fear was the most efficient leadership tool, and until then it worked. Lucas admired him, or at least wanted to admire him, but the more he got to know him, the more he realized how much the company was driven by vanity, not merit. Still, he tried to stand out through his work. He was the type of employee who stayed late, who reviewed everything 3 times, and volunteered for extra projects. One night, while most had already left, Lucas was still in the conference room, reviewing a financial restructuring plan. He believed that project could save the company from losing millions. It was bold, detailed, and efficient. And more than that, it was his chance to show he wasn't just another analyst. When he finished, he sent the proposal directly to Edward. The next day, he was called to his office. "So this is what you call innovation?" Edward asked, flipping through the pages without looking at the young man. "Yes, sir. I reviewed every number. If we apply the model, we can reduce costs by up to 12% without firing anyone." Edward closed the folder and leaned back in his chair. "Lucas, do you know what your problem is? You think you understand more than others." "I just wanted to help," he replied, trying to stay calm. "And I appreciate enthusiasm, really. But this is the type of proposal that could put the company's image at risk if misinterpreted. I verified everything, sir. Everything is correct," he insisted. Edward stood up and walked slowly toward him. His tone lowered, but each word carried venom. "Listen, kid. Good ideas are useless when they come from the wrong person." Lucas remained silent. He knew what that meant. Edward didn't want solutions. He wanted control. From that day on, everything changed. Conversations in the office began to go silent when Lucas passed by. Glances became cold. Reports he sent mysteriously disappeared. And in meetings, his ideas were frequently represented by others, with Edward's name on top. He tried to ignore it, but the small humiliations accumulated, until on a rainy Monday morning everything came crashing down. The team gathered to discuss the quarter's results. The numbers were negative, and Edward needed a scapegoat. During the presentation, he interrupted Lucas in front of everyone. "This data is incorrect," he said loudly. "It's not, sir. It was reviewed twice," Lucas replied. "Are you calling me a liar?" Edward advanced one step. The room went silent. Lucas took a deep breath. "No, sir, I'm just saying the numbers are accurate." Edward laughed. "You know, Miller, it's amazing how you speak with such confidence for someone so expendable." The words echoed like a blow. No one said anything. Just uncomfortable looks. Keyboards stopped, and the distant sound of rain hitting the windows. That afternoon, Lucas was called to HR. The official justification was internal restructuring, but he knew the truth. As he left the building, under the grey sky, he felt the weight of defeat. He remembered the late nights of work, the efforts to prove his worth, and the promise of a future that now seemed to dissolve before him. He took the subway back home, looking at his reflection in the train's glass, and for the first time he wondered if Edward was right, if he really would never be anyone. The following months were hell. Lucas looked for jobs at other companies, but the recommendations coming from Collins and Partners were lukewarm, ambiguous. It seemed Edward had made sure to close all doors. Without prospects, he began working on small accounting projects for local startups. Nothing glamorous, but it was enough to pay rent and keep his head busy. It was during this period that he met Sarah, an entrepreneur who had just opened a small tech company. She needed someone to handle finances, and Lucas, desperate for a new chance, accepted the challenge. Sarah was the opposite of Edward, empathetic, visionary, and with contagious energy. While Edward led through fear, she inspired through trust. Gradually, Lucas recovered his faith in himself. They worked side by side in a small improvised office on the second floor of an old building. The ceiling had leaks, the air conditioning was always broken, but the atmosphere was light, full of hope. It was there that Lucas began to realize that success didn't depend on pleasing powerful people, but on creating something real. Together, they developed a simple tool that helped small businesses organize their finances automatically. The prototype was rudimentary, but it worked. And most importantly, it solved a real problem. The first months were tough. There were failures, coding errors, sleepless nights. But slowly, customers began to appear. A local restaurant, then a small store, then another. Word of mouth started to work. Lucas came home exhausted, but with a smile on his face. For the first time, he felt he was building something of his own. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Edward began to face his own ghosts. The arrogance that once sustained him now isolated him. Colleagues began to leave him aside. The board questioned his decisions. Company profits fell, and investors demanded changes. But Edward refused to listen. To him, the problem was never his. It was others. It was always lack of commitment, incompetence, lack of vision. He still believed he was untouchable. Until one day, he received an email from the board. Extraordinary meeting, performance analysis, and partial sale proposal. Edward ignored the warning, but without knowing that message was the beginning of his end. While Collins and partners began to crumble, Lucas's startup gained strength. Investors began to take interest. The company grew, moved headquarters, hired staff. Lucas, now more mature, understood the value of humility and collaboration, everything Edward never had. He still remembered his former boss's words, echoing in his mind, "The world doesn't need dreamers. It needs people who obey." And that was exactly what he refused to be. At the height of this new phase, Sarah called him for a conversation. "Lucas, we received a partnership proposal. Big. It's with a consulting firm that wants to use our platform to reorganize their processes." Lucas smiled. "That's incredible. What's the company's name?" Sarah opened the laptop, turned the screen toward him. The logo appeared. Collins and Partners. The coffee he was holding almost fell from his hand. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The past, which he believed he had left behind, was back, and this time in his hands. Fate had just opened the door for a reckoning that would change everything. The silence in Sarah's office was cut only by the sound of the wall clock. Lucas was still staring at the name on the screen, Collins and Partners. The company that had humiliated him, fired him, erased him, was now about to extend its hand, asking for help. Sarah noticed the impact. "Lucas, do you know this company?" He took a deep breath before answering. "I know it more than I'd like to." She watched him for a few seconds, trying to understand. "If it's a personal issue, we can refuse." Lucas shook his head. "No, we'll accept. I just want to see how far this goes." Days later, Sarah's team received a formal invitation. A meeting at Collins and Partners headquarters to discuss the integration of the financial platform created by Lucas. His name, of course, didn't appear in the documentation. He was just the lead technical consultant. But that was enough. He wanted to look into the eyes of the past again. On the scheduled morning, Lucas prepared calmly. He put on the dark suit, adjusted his tie, and headed to downtown Chicago. With each step toward the glass building, memories came back like distant echoes. The jokes, the humiliations, the dismissal. When he entered the lobby, the same smell of coffee and disinfectant hit him. The same polished marble floor, the same people walking hurriedly with folders in their hands. But something was different. This time, he wasn't the scared kid from before. He was the man who built something on his own. On the 30th floor, he was received by an assistant. "Mr. Miller, this way please, the financial director is waiting for you." The name made Lucas's heart beat faster. Edward. When he entered the room, time seemed to freeze. The man behind the desk was the same, but different. Grey hair, deep, dark circles, and tired eyes replaced the arrogance from before. Still, the cynical smile was still there. Lucas Miller, who would have thought? The tone was almost mocking. "How long has it been?" 4. 5 years. 5, Lucas replied firmly. Edward leaned back in his chair. I heard you have your own company now. Congratulations. Thank you. I see life smiles on you. Good to know. He crossed his arms. So, you're the one responsible for this platform everyone's talking about. Lucas nodded. I am, and I believe it can solve many of the management problems you've been facing. Edward laughed, not hiding his sarcasm. Really? You mean now the kid I had to fire comes to teach me how to run my company? Lucas kept his gaze steady. I didn't come to teach, Mr. Collins. I came to propose a solution. The silence that followed was charged with electricity. Edward stared at him for a few seconds, then looked away and flipped through the reports. Let's see if your solution is as good as they say. During the meeting, Lucas presented every technical detail, every performance metric. He spoke confidently, without hesitation. Sarah, beside him, watched impressed by the serenity with which he conducted everything, even before the man who destroyed him. But Edward couldn't hide his discomfort. With each compliment Lucas received from the other directors, his gaze hardened more. It was as if each word was a reminder that he had underestimated someone who was now above his expectations. At the end of the meeting, the board approved the project. Collins and partners would establish an integration partnership with Lucas's company. Edward forced a professional smile. Congratulations, seems like the world goes around. Lucas simply replied, yes, sometimes it goes around quite completely. In the following months, Lucas began to frequent the building regularly. With each visit, he noticed how the empire that once rejected him now depended on his creation, but he also noticed something darker. Edward was plotting something. Small details gave it away, reports that disappeared, rumors spread about system failures, truncated emails, interrupted conversations when he entered the room. Sarah noticed first. Lucas, something's wrong. Edward is trying to sabotage the contract. I know, he replied, but I want to see how far he'll go. Time passed, and the integration project was about to be finalized. It was the last step before the final payment, the biggest contract in Lucas's company history. It was then that, on a Friday night, everything collapsed. Sarah called him, desperate. Lucas, the system crashed. They're saying there was a security breach and our data was exposed. Lucas ran to the office. The screens showed error messages, corrupted reports, and files disappearing in real time. It was impossible. The system had been hacked. He spent the night trying to restore the server, but part of the data was lost. The next day, he received a formal email from Collins and partners. Due to the system failure, the contract is suspended pending further deliberation. He knew what that meant. They were getting rid of him. Again. On Monday, he decided to go there in person. When he entered Edward's office, the director was already waiting with a satisfied smile. Mr. Miller, what a shame about what happened. You know very well what happened, Edward. Me, he said, feigning innocence. If there was a security problem, it's your team's responsibility. You manipulated the system. The failure was internal. Proof? He asked with a cold smile. Lucas remained silent. He didn't have proof yet. Edward stood up, walking around the desk. You know, Lucas, when I saw you walk in here again, I found it admirable. But deep down, I knew you hadn't changed. You're still the same dreamer kid thinking you can change the world with good intentions. Lucas clenched his fists. And you're still the same small man who needs to destroy others to feel big. Edward approached, staring at him up close. The difference, my dear, is that I still have power, and you're going to lose everything you built. The air became heavy. For a moment, Lucas wanted to react, but held back the impulse. He knew he couldn't win that game with anger. He needed strategy. He left the room in silence, the sound of footsteps echoing through the corridors like dry beats on marble. When the elevator doors closed, he took a deep breath. He knew this was the turning point. In the following days, he dove into searching for answers. He reviewed system logs, analyzed servers, compared access times, and then he found it. A hidden record, an internal IP accessing the data at the same time as the invasion. The address belonged to Edward Collins's computer. But before he could act, something unexpected happened. An external audit was called, and the report pointed to Lucas's company as responsible for the security breach. The contract was officially cancelled, investors backed out, and within weeks his name was tarnished. The same cycle repeated. Humiliation, loss, distrust. Sarah tried to comfort him. We'll bounce back, Lucas. There's always a way. But he didn't respond. The anger was too great. He knew who was behind it all. That night, sitting alone in his empty office, Lucas looked at his reflection in the window. On the other side of town, the Collins and Partners light still shone, like a distant provocation, and it was there, in the silence, that he made his decision. He would no longer be the humiliated boy. He would no longer be the naive dreamer. If Edward wanted war, he would have it. The phone vibrated. An anonymous message. Just one sentence. "If you want to bring down Edward Collins, I can help." Lucas stared at the screen for long seconds. He didn't know who was on the other side, but he knew it was the beginning of something big. The game had turned, and this time, he would play to win. Lucas's phone trembled in his hand. The message blinked on the screen like a dangerous invitation. "If you want to bring down Edward Collins, I can help." He looked around, suspicious, as if the sender could be watching. It was a message without an identified number, without a signature, without any clue, but there was something about it, something that sounded real. After a few seconds of hesitation, he replied only, "Who are you?" The silence lasted long minutes, until finally the phone vibrated again. Someone who used to work for him, and who knows what he did. That night, Lucas didn't sleep. He spent hours reviewing every detail of the system attack, trying to understand who could have so much access to Collins and Partners' internal information. The invader had used legitimate credentials, which meant only one thing: someone inside helped. The next day, Lucas received another message, an address and a time: Brookline Cafe, 9:30 a.m. He hesitated for a moment, but decided to go. He had nothing left to lose. The cafe was discreet, on an old Chicago corner, far from the mirrored buildings and the noise of cars. When he arrived, he looked among the tables until a voice called him. "Lucas Miller." He turned around. A woman, about 40 years old, red hair tied in a bun, stared at him with a serious expression. "I'm Emily. I was an analyst at Collins for almost 10 years. She gestured for him to sit. Lucas obeyed, still alert. "Was it you who sent me the message?" "It was." She leaned slightly forward. "And I know what Edward did to you." Emily told what she had discovered. Edward had been diverting company resources for years. He created fake contracts, overcharged projects, and used shell companies to hide the money. When Lucas presented his platform, it threatened to expose the real accounting, and that's why he needed to destroy it. Lucas listened in silence, blood boiling. "Do you have proof of this?" Emily took a flash drive from her pocket and placed it on the table. "I do. All the records are here. Emails, reports, transfers. But there's a problem. Edward discovered I was tracking the files. I was fired 2 months ago. Since then, he's been trying to silence me." Lucas picked up the flash drive. "Why help me?" She took a deep breath. "Because he ruined my career, and because I saw what he did to you. Now it's your chance to settle accounts." Back at the office, Lucas connected the flash drive. On the screen, dozens of folders opened, spreadsheets, internal communications, even personal messages between Edward and business partners. What he saw was worse than he imagined. Edward hadn't just sabotaged his company, but also used Lucas's name to cover up his own fraud. Every altered line of code, every purposeful failure in the system, everything had a purpose. Divert auditors' attention to Lucas's software while money quietly disappeared. It was there that the seed of revenge began to germinate. But Lucas knew he needed to act carefully. In the following days, he began to infiltrate the backstage again. With Emily's help, he discovered that Edward planned to sell Collins and Partners to a foreign corporation, and with that, erase all traces of corruption before the final audit. If the contract was signed, he would escape unpunished. Lucas decided to turn the game around. He would use Edward's own system against him. He created an algorithm capable of tracking secret transfers and connecting each financial movement to the director's personal account. It was risky, but if it worked, it would be the perfect blow. Meanwhile, Edward seemed increasingly confident. He walked through the corridors with the same air of sovereignty as before, laughing loudly, making speeches about overcoming difficult times. Backstage, however, he pressured employees, manipulated reports, and threatened anyone who doubted him. Sarah realized something big was underway. "Lucas, what are you planning?" "Justice," he replied without hesitation, "but my way." On a rainy night, Lucas and Emily met in a small improvised office. The screens showed graphs, connections, and transactions. It was the complete map of Edward's corruption. "Here," she said, pointing at the screen, This account in the Cayman Islands is directly linked to the phantom payment of the European project. If we cross it with Collins' internal records, we can prove he diverted funds from the company itself, Lucas completed. But you'll need more than spreadsheets. You'll need a public impact. He nodded. He already had a plan. A week later, Edward called a press conference to announce the sale of Collins and Partners. It would be the great rebirth of the company and the moment he would consolidate his image as a corporate genius. The cameras, the journalists, the spotlight, everything was ready for his show. Lucas was also there, not as a guest but as a silent spectator. Sarah and Emily accompanied him at a distance, each with a laptop ready. When Edward went up on stage and began his speech about honesty, resilience, and business values, Lucas triggered the command on the keyboard. A second later, the screen behind Edward flickered. The spreadsheets began to appear, one by one. Emails, messages, bank receipts. Everything projected live before the press, the board, the employees. The audience was shocked. Edward froze mid-sentence, looking back, pale. What is this?" he murmured, trying to maintain composure. Voices began to rise. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras turned toward him. Lucas watched from afar, impassive. "This is what happens," he whispered, "when someone thinks they can manipulate everyone forever." But the plan didn't go perfectly. Minutes later, security agents invaded the system and took down the transmission. Edward reacted quickly, turning off the screen and trying to regain control of the situation. "This is a farce," he shouted. "Attempted sabotage." Lucas knew he needed to get out of there before they traced him. He grabbed his things and left with Sarah and Emily through the back of the building. That night, the news exploded. Financial scandal shakes Collins and Partners. Director accused of million-dollar fraud. But Edward still wasn't defeated. He had contacts, lawyers, and a powerful reputation. And what Lucas didn't know was that he had also discovered Emily's involvement. 2 days later, Emily disappeared. Her phone was found in an empty parking lot, the car abandoned. Lucas tried calling several times without success. A chill ran down his spine. "Sarah, I think he did something to her." "My God, Lucas, what are you going to do?" He looked out the window, the cold reflection of Chicago at night shining in his eyes. Rain streamed down the glass like trails of destiny. "Now, Sarah, now he's gone too far." As he spoke, the computer beeped. A new email arrived. No sender, no subject, just one line. "You started the game, Lucas, but I still make the rules." Blood froze in his veins. The war had ceased to be corporate. Now it was personal. Lucas's office was immersed in silence. Chicago's lights blinked outside, reflecting on the windows like small urban lightning. He stared at the computer screen. Lines of code, IP traces, encrypted email records. Nothing led anywhere. Emily remained missing. It had been 5 days. The police treated the case as voluntary abandonment, but Lucas knew Edward was behind it. Sarah entered the room, bringing 2 cups of coffee. "You need to sleep, Lucas." "I can't. If I stop now, he wins." She set the cup beside the keyboard. "You already exposed him. He's being investigated. His name is in the news every day. And he's still free," he interrupted. "He still has money, influence, and now he's playing dirty." Lucas enlarged one of the images on the monitor. It was a security capture from the parking lot where they found Emily's car. In the background, almost out of focus, a male silhouette was leaving a black SUV. Similar height, similar build. But the face was covered. "Can you trace the plate?" he asked. Sarah nodded, opening another program. Minutes later, the result appeared. Property. Collins Enterprises. Lucas's stomach turned. There were no doubts left. Edward had sent a clear message. "I can touch whoever I want." The next day, the news brought a twist. Edward Collins reappears at gala event and denies all accusations. Lucas watched the broadcast in disbelief. There he was, elegant, smiling, surrounded by reporters. He spoke confidently, as if he were the victim of a great injustice. "These accusations are absurd. My lawyers are handling this. It's nothing but a setup created by a resentful former employee," Edward said, with the rehearsed tone of an experienced actor. And then a reporter asked, "Are you referring to Lucas Miller?" Edward smiled sideways. "Exactly. Someone who, ironically, I gave a chance in the past, and now tries to destroy the legacy I built." Sarah turned off the TV. "He's turning you against public opinion. That's what he does best," Lucas replied bitterly. "Manipulate." But this time he wouldn't stay silent. Lucas prepared a complete digital dossier with all the remaining evidence that hadn't been exposed. He planned to publish everything in a major independent news network, one that couldn't be bought by Edward's money. The problem was that he needed a final confirmation, a recording, a signature, anything that linked Edward directly to the illicit accounts, and that proof was on Collins & Partners' main server. That night, Lucas and Sarah went to the company's old headquarters. The building was partially empty, since much of the staff had been dismissed after the scandal. With old badges and a little digital help, they gained access to the server floor. The constant sound of machines filled the air like a low hum. Sarah looked around tense. If someone catches us here, we're screwed. We're past the point of return, Sarah. He connected the laptop to the network and began deciphering the security layers. Codes, passwords, old logs, everything stored like a digital war vault. But Lucas knew that system. He himself had designed it years ago when he still believed in Edward. Suddenly, an alert appeared on the screen. Access detected. IP traced. Sarah's eyes widened. He saw you. No, Lucas typed frantically. He wants me to think he saw me. But seconds later, Sarah's phone vibrated. A message. No number. Nice to see you two back at work. But remember, curiosity kills. She went pale. Lucas looked at the ceiling, at the cameras. He's watching us. He disconnected the laptop immediately. Both ran to the parking lot, hearts racing. Outside, rain began to fall. A black car was parked a few meters away, engine running, dark windows. Lucas took a step forward, trying to see the driver, but the vehicle took off with a loud roar, disappearing around the corner. Back at the apartment, the mood was tense. Lucas knew Edward was anticipating his moves. Maybe he had an informant. Maybe he had hacked the systems. What if Emily had been used as bait? This doubt gnawed at his mind. He's playing with you, Lucas, Sarah said. He wants to destabilize you. Then let's do the same to him. Lucas opened the laptop and started typing. He created a reverse tracking, a digital mirror that sent false data to whoever tried to invade his system. If Edward wanted war, he would have it. On the other side of town, Edward was also making moves. In his luxurious penthouse, he watched the news on television while sipping expensive whiskey. His face remained calm, but his eyes betrayed the tension. The press was starting to suspect. Investors were backing away. And for the first time, the empire he had built with arrogance was trembling. He thinks he can beat me, he murmured, looking out the window. But he doesn't know the rules of this game. He picked up his phone and made a call. Make sure he understands what's at stake. Do you want it to be a warning or the end? Asked the voice on the other side. Edward smiled. Not yet. Let's let him sweat a little. 2 days later, Lucas received an envelope under the door. No sender. Inside, just a photograph. Emily, tied up, blindfolded, and on the back, a handwritten sentence. Last chance. The world seemed to spin. Sarah covered her mouth, horrified. My God, Lucas, what did he do? Lucas took a deep breath. Fear gave way to determination. He wants to break me. He wants me to react with emotion. And what are you going to do? I'm going to react with intelligence. That night, Lucas activated a protocol he had been building in secret since the beginning. It was called Phoenix. It was a program capable of automatically releasing all files about Edward on multiple channels, journalists, forums, international networks, the moment its creator disappeared. A digital life insurance. But he didn't want to die, he wanted to win and save Emily. Sarah tried to convince him not to act alone, but it was too late. Lucas had already made up his mind. While loading the car, he looked at her and said, If I don't come back by tomorrow, execute Phoenix. Lucas, don't do this. It's the only way. He needs to believe he still has control. The road to Edward's property was deserted, surrounded by trees and fog. The sound of the engine was the only noise in the cold night. Lucas gripped the steering wheel tightly, his heart beating to the rhythm of revenge and fear. On the other side, Edward was waiting for him. He knew he would come, and he smiled, satisfied, as he watched the entrance cameras showing the car approaching. Finally, he murmured, Let's see if the boy has the courage to face his own creator. The gate opened slowly, the calm before the storm. The morning fog mixed with the streetlights when Lucas parked the car near Edward's mansion. His heart beat fast, but there was clarity in every step. He knew this would be the final move. Sarah accompanied him, silent, her gaze worried but confident. Remember, Lucas, she said, Phoenix is ready. If anything happens, it will be activated. "It won't be needed," he replied firmly. "Today he'll fall by his own weight." As they approached the entrance, the gate opened slowly, as if the walls themselves knew the outcome that was approaching. Inside, Edward awaited them, leaning against the main hall columns. His cynical smile remained, but there was an imperceptible tension in his eyes. "Did you come alone?" Edward asked, crossing his arms. "No. I came accompanied by the truth," Lucas replied, holding the folder with digital evidence firmly. Edward gave a low laugh. "Ah, the truth. Always so relative, isn't it?" "Truth is simple, Edward," Lucas said, "and this time, everyone will see it." He connected the laptop to the mansion's system, which was integrated with the meeting room screens. Within seconds, emails, transfers, compromising messages began to appear in real time. Each file exposed a crime. Each piece of evidence showed Edward's fraud and manipulations. Edward's eyes widened, stepping back slightly. "This can't be. How did you get this?" "The only thing you didn't control was your own arrogance," Lucas replied, his voice firm, almost cold. The hall doors suddenly opened. Emily appeared alive, with some marks of tension but conscious. "Lucas," she whispered, relieved. Edward swallowed hard. "This isn't possible," he stammered, his mask of confidence falling gradually. Lucas approached, determination reflected in his eyes with each step. "Look around you, Edward. Every action of yours has a consequence. Every lie, a price. Today, it arrived." Edward tried to react, search for some excuse, but each attempt was interrupted by the evidence projected on the screens. Documents signed by him, transfers to secret accounts, falsified contracts, everything visible, impossible to deny. "I always thought I could manipulate everything and everyone," he murmured, finally admitting. "But I underestimated you." Lucas took a step forward. "And now, Edward, you're going to understand what justice is." The authorities, previously contacted by Lucas through journalists and recordings, entered the hall in perfect synchronization. Police officers and auditors walked forward, looking at Edward with the seriousness of those who no longer tolerate excuses. "Edward Collins, you're under arrest for fraud, financial manipulation, and attempted sabotage," said the detective, while Edward tried to resist. But there was no more escape. As he was being taken away, Edward looked at Lucas and tried to say some words. "You don't know what you're doing." Lucas responded only with a firm and silent gaze, loaded with meaning. "I know exactly," he thought. "Every step, every calculation, and now poetic justice is complete." With Edward removed, Lucas and Emily turned to Sarah. "He'll answer for everything. But our battle isn't over," Lucas said. "Today we start rebuilding," Emily completed, a timid but hopeful smile appearing on her face. In the following days, the press covered every detail of the scandal. Collins and partners entered financial collapse. Edward faced formal charges and had to return part of the diverted assets. Lucas became a symbol of perseverance, justice, and strategy, the man who turned the game around without losing ethics. He also made sure to support Emily, ensuring she had opportunities to rebuild her career and start over away from Edward's shadows. "You saved us all," she said, emotional. "It wasn't just me," Lucas replied. "It was the truth, finally revealed." That afternoon, sitting in front of the window, Lucas reflected on everything that happened. The game that started as humiliation and loss transformed into learning, strategy, and poetic justice. Karma had been proportional, ironic, and satisfying. Edward had fallen by his own arrogance, and Lucas emerged not just victorious but stronger, wiser. He smiled, closing his eyes for a moment. Sometimes, justice doesn't need quick blows, just patience, intelligence, and courage. 1 month later, the city of Chicago continued its frantic rhythm, but for Lucas, each light reflected on the streets symbolized victory, restart, and new opportunities. The past was left behind, and the future was finally in his hands. The morning sun came through Lucas's office windows, illuminating the city of Chicago. He looked at the busy streets, reflecting on the last few months. Everything had changed: his career, his life, and even the way he saw the corporate world. Emily entered the room with a serene smile. "So we're finally free." "Yes," Lucas replied, still absorbing the feeling of completed justice. "But it's not just about freedom. It's about responsibility." The impact of the Collins scandal reverberated throughout the city. Edward, once invincible, now faced a legal process that would last years. He lost control of Collins and partners, His reputation was destroyed, and all the partners who once admired him walked away. Lucas watched with certain detachment. He didn't feel pleasure in seeing someone suffer. He felt satisfaction in seeing justice balanced, proportional, inevitable. Sarah entered with coffee and documents. Lucas, investors confirmed, "Your company now has stability and total market confidence." "Great," he replied, "but I want this to go beyond numbers. I want it to inspire people." He turned, facing the two familiar faces who supported him from the beginning. "Each of you had courage. Emily, you trusted and took risks. Sarah, you maintained sanity and reminded me to think before acting. Without you, none of this would be possible." Emily took a deep breath, remembering each moment of tension, the kidnapping, the fear, the uncertainty. "I never imagined I could come out so strengthened." "Sometimes," Lucas said, "the worst experience is also the greatest opportunity for growth." Months later, Collins and Partners was officially acquired by an ethical international group, and Lucas took on the role of strategic consultant. Emily started her own auditing and compliance consulting firm, helping companies avoid fraud like the one they had faced. Sarah became operations director of a new branch of Lucas's company, applying all the experience gained during the crisis. Everyone was rebuilding their lives, each with learning, responsibility, and awareness that justice, when sought intelligently, always prevails. Lucas remembered how it all started, from the moment Edward humiliated him, from the day he destroyed his confidence, from the feeling of powerlessness. It was impossible not to feel anger when remembering, but he had transformed that anger into strategy, patience, and determination. Every difficulty, every injustice, he thought, is a chance to learn and grow. He picked up his phone and opened the email he had prepared months ago, directed to investors and journalists. It was the final public letter. "It's not about revenge. It's about justice, ethics, and truth. May every mistake made be learned from, and may every action be measurable by its consequences. What began as a personal defeat became a lesson for all of us." At that moment, Lucas decided his story should inspire others. He recorded a video for the company's corporate channel. "If you've ever been wronged, know that you're not alone. The important thing is to transform anger into intelligent action, and never underestimate the power of patience, preparation, and truth." He turned to the camera, facing the invisible audience. "And you? Have you ever gone through something that seemed impossible to overcome? How would you react if you had the chance to correct an injustice? Leave your story in the comments. Let's talk about it." Lucas knew life would continue bringing challenges, but now he possessed something Edward could never steal: confidence, strategy, and the certainty that well-planned justice always defeats arrogance. He closed his eyes for a moment and breathed deeply. The past was resolved. The future was in his hands. "Remember," he murmured, as if speaking to everyone watching, "power isn't in humiliating others. It's in rising stronger, wiser, and more just." Based on events inspired by real life, justice, patience, and courage transform lives. Thank you so much for following this story to the end. Every minute you spend here helps us continue bringing stories of overcoming, justice, and incredible twists. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave your like, share with friends, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any exciting stories like this one. And now we want to hear from you. Have you ever gone through an unjust situation and managed to turn things around? Tell your story in the comments. Your experience can inspire other people not to give up. Remember, every challenge is an opportunity to grow and show your strength. Here on the channel, we celebrate those who transform difficulties into victory.